Welcome to Forbidden Planet TV. I'm Andrew Sumner, and I'm very pleased to welcome back a returning guest, one of our favourite creators, the one, the only Ram V. How are you, mate?
Pleasure to be here. Yeah, I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, man. I'm good, thanks, man. We were talking about many things off camera before we began this
Yeah.
interview, none of which we'll get into right now. I'm looking forward to having an extended socio-political, economic conversation in the future, mate. But for
Yeah,
right now, what we're going to do is talk about all the sterling work you're doing within the symbiote section of
sure.
the Marvel universe. So you're producing a tremendously entertaining um, Venom book with
hmm
with our with our other old pal, but Al Ewing. But what I want to talk to you right now about is your involvement in Carnage
Yeah,
for 2022.
yeah.
So we're here to talk about the first issue of your Carnage book with Francesco Manna. But before we get into that, could you tell me about your involvement in the Carnage Forever event?
Yeah, actually, I was approached to do the short story for the Carnage Forever event, but we never discussed what I was going to do with my editors until I already knew I was going to be writing the ongoing. So I think in an interesting way, the Carnage Forever story is more of a vignette that literally and very linearly ties into the beginning of my Carnage run. So that one was an easy thing to come up with.
Yeah.
Um, uh, I believe it is Salvador La Roca on art on that one, and yeah, I mean it literally is setting up the ongoing via a think of it as a teaser for the ongoing, if you will. And it's weird. Like I was trying to go out and tell people like, oh, I'm not just a horror writer, or I'm not, just a sci-fi writer. I like to play in all genres. But this one is so unashamedly and obviously horror that I'm just like, look, why am I even trying to tell people like this is just it's just gory, bloody, scary stuff. Um, but with a vein of I still like my stories to examine very human things and very human characters, and so I think that stays true despite the all the zany, crazy, over the top blood and gore stuff going on.
Yeah. So what was I mean I think this is specifically a character that side of your writing persona is perfect for. Just to take a step back, mate, what was your first exposure to the Venom symbiote Carnage corner of the Marvel universe? When did you first become aware of it?
So long before I even considered writing comics, I was a kid in India, and I used to come back home from school, and every afternoon we used to get the Spider-Man animated series on TV, and I remember really looking at that and going like, oh, it's a Spider-Man but in a black suit. What? It's an alien. What? It takes over people. What's going on? Um, so yeah, that was really my first exposure to that sort of symbiote side, and I never went back to it. I never thought, gave it another thought until out of nowhere, Devin, who's the editor on the symbiote side of things at Marvel, got in touch. Like, hey, do you want to take on Venom? And it seems such an out of left field thing for me to do that my brain, although part of me was like, do I have something to write here? Do I have something to say here? The other part of my brain was like, this is so unexpected. We should say yes. So so yeah, so I did, and I think at least for me, Carnage, which is a more contained project because it's just one person writing it, also just feels like, okay, if Venom's like the big interconnected bombastic thing I'm doing, then I can hope for Carnage to be the more sort of weird, inward looking, examining itself kind of narrative to write alongside that.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, I think it's a great, again, a great confluence of the things that you're very good at doing. Also, though, with getting the chance to work in a very mainstream part of the
Yeah,
Marvel
yeah,
universe. So I think that in itself is an interesting tension, an interesting opportunity.
Yeah.
What can you give me a flavour of what we're going to find in Carnage issue 1 and in your Carnage series without spoiling it?
I could say this. One of the feedbacks I got was like, has Carnage ever been this intelligent? Has Carnage ever appeared to speak in this manner before? I'm not sure. It was one of the editorial notes I got, and I remember going back and saying like, yeah, but that's because I haven't written him before, and I'm writing him now, and it works. And I just sent in issue 2, and my editors were like, "Oh, we have no notes. This is all great." And it does do that very specific thing of, it takes my horror sensibilities, which certainly come from prose and a little bit of literary or gothic horror here and there, and it absolutely marries that with like Marvel mainstream craziness. In certainly, especially in issue 2, there's an encounter that is so inherently Marvel and absurd, and yet it is also this very sort of gothic horror piece, if you will. So I'm enjoying that, and I think Carnage especially makes for that sort of very interesting character, because he's got this tendency to do these absolutely abhorrent things, and yet I am now writing him in a way where there is, through some twisted justification, a rather elegant philosophical thinking behind why he's doing all these terrible things. So yeah, so I think that's an interesting thing to write.
Of course, it sounds very interesting. Are you enjoying working with Francesco on the book?
Yes. So very early on, we knew that, I discussed this with the editor. I said, I want someone who can certainly pull off the horror stuff, but can also pull off the more structured classic noir sensibilities, because that is one of the sort of aesthetics that I wanted to infuse into the storyline. Because alongside the story of Carnage, there's also the story of a obsessed detective chasing after a serial killer. So both those narratives intertwine throughout, and I think it's really interesting to see Francesco's work on it, because I've seen some of the initial pages. They go from sort of structured noir mundane to absolutely crazy blood everywhere to utterly beautiful, there's like a million butterflies flying through the page. Yeah, that kind of versatility is rare, and so it's very exciting to work with someone who does that.
And yeah, I mean, he's such a wonderful artist, and I think I love the way Marvel have really got behind this book. And there's, for issue 1, which for everybody watching this, you can order from the links attached to this conversation. There's a wealth of wonderful alternative covers. I was just taking a look at them with Rob Pontefract, our mutual friend, our head buyer here at Forbidden Planet. And there's some lovely covers for issue 1. There's a really great Brian Hitch cover. That's and it must be such a pleasure as both a writer but as a fan, and as being that kid in India who watched those episodes of the animated series. I guess it must be a constant joy to be on the other side of the process and to be able to look at all of that come together.
I mean, in a way, it feels like I try not to actually think of these things as a fan. I remember very early on, I had a conversation with an editor. I said expressly, if you want to do something interesting with these things, you have to not approach it as a fan, you have to approach it as a writer. And I think inherent to that is this idea that I've seen what this thing is, 25, 30 years ago, and it has been all these other things in the meantime. And now that I've gotten here, my first instinct is to go like, how do I do something with this that hasn't been done, that hasn't been seen? And in that, I think there's a rediscovery of that kind of zany, childish joy of like, what is this thing? Is it Spider-Man? Is it an alien? Is it? And I think rediscovering that joy for me is through just going like, okay, I'm going to do something here that hasn't been done so far in any of the runs. So
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, again, I can't wait to see it, mate. And I think everybody, the pages that I've seen look amazing, and Rob and I are both very excited about it. So everybody watching this, you can order Carnage issue 1, which is out in March, from the links attached to this conversation. But Ram, you're coming off a great year, and we were with many highlights actually, because you've got your great Venom book with Al, but also your personal projects this year. You've hit a couple of high notes. There's your ongoing Radio Apocalypse series from Vault, and you were on here recently talking about that. And
yeah,
there's a collection, the Volume 1 collection, I
yeah,
think, is going
trade
to be out.
paperback.
It's coming up in June time, and
Yeah.
again, you can order that from here. How do you feel about the response to Radio Apocalypse thus far?
Yeah, that was a really interesting one. I think I had some of the strongest responses I've had to an issue 1, but for reasons that I've never had before. And that people read issue 1, they were like, "Oh, this was pretty good." And then there were people who read issue 1 the way it was meant to be read, which is I played all the music that I was supposed to play as per the comic. Because the big shtick of the comic is that when you find a certain soundtrack being played in the comic, you're supposed to go find that music and play it.
Yeah.
And there were people who did that, and the ones who did that were just like I was staggered by the emotional response I had to reading this book, because I genuinely think, and I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I believe like a lot of creative people who visualize and conceptualize for a living, tend to have some measure of synesthesia where your senses are a little bit muddled, where like music will evoke images in your head, yes, or images will evoke smell and taste and texture. And I think comics is really a medium that is at the confluence of that kind of synesthesia experience, where you're looking at images, you're feeling paper, you're reading, and you're also you could be listening to music at the same time. And I think just in terms of format and medium, it's a very interesting thing to push into. Maybe 10 years down the line, no one will remember. Maybe 10 years down the line, everyone will be reading comics with music playing as a part of the experience. So let's see.
I mean, I certainly hope that's the case. You're absolutely right, of course, because I think we've talked about this before, but I used to write for the NME, and I used to be a music magazine publisher. I used to publish Uncut magazine for many years.
Yeah.
And the thing that I know about music journalists, and music journalists just happen to be hardcore music fans who
Yeah.
write about the music they love. They all love comics as well. I mean, there's very few music aficionados. Comic fans and music fans really index highly, even more highly than comic fans and movie fans do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I could totally understand why.
Yeah.
The number of comics creators that I know that are parts of bands, there are a number of comics creators.
Right on.
Also, I think as a culture, certainly in the UK, comics, indie creation culture, and a punk rock aesthetic have a lot of intermingling, a lot of intersectionality, and I think simply because it is sort of the embodiment of that idea of, well, you don't need anything other than a pen and some drawing ability to tell a story. And with punk music, it's the same thing. You don't need the big snazzy whatever $1,000 guitar. You don't need all you need is some words, a voice, and a little bit of musical instruments on the side.
Oh, mate, it's so true. I mean, this even extends to I don't know if you know this. You may well do, but the original site of Forbidden Planet was on Denmark Street in London, Timpan Alley.
I didn't know this.
And the original site of the original Forbidden Planet store was formerly a music shop. And
right.
that road is all music shops, And,
right. Yeah. I've been to Denmark Street. So
yeah, no, of course, it's a wonderful.
I picked up my guitar there. So
well, my son picked up his guitars. Yeah, it's exactly right. And we were right in the heart of it. And Forbidden Planet, and indeed the beginnings of our our sister businesses, Titan Comics, Titan Books,
Mm.
were in the basement of that store on Denmark Street. So
Right.
that confluence between comics and music, I get it. And the slightly renegade nature of like the punk era in the late 70s, that's massively encoded with British comic books of that time.
Yeah, I certainly think so. And I think they continue to be today, in that I always find it very funny when people come and say like, "Oh, comics should not be political." I'm like, what are you talking about?
It's nonsense.
Like the root of every kind of comic, whether that's the American superhero comic or the sort of European bande dessinée or the British kind of 2000 AD zany sort of comic. All of those things originate in entirely political statements, and so it's more apparent, especially to me, being very close to the British indie comics culture, that more so than in any other format now. But I find that to be the case because of this kind of very bootstrap nature of making comics, which is very similar to the bootstrap nature of making music. And therefore, both are inspired by the need to say something, which is very political in itself.
1000%. I mean, even perhaps the most establishment superhero archetype within the Marvel universe, certainly, that the reason people try and, I think, co-opt Captain America for the American establishment and fail whenever they do that is because Captain America is, of course, at its heart, anti-Nazi propaganda created by two Jewish creators who are ahead of their time in terms of
it's also the embodiment of idealism over practicality, right? Like Captain America is the embodiment of the American ideal, not the American
reality. So true. So true.
And so to constantly try and co-opt him to be the symbol of what is currently American pragmatism is inherently flawed, because you will never live up to what Captain America is meant to be.
Absolutely, 1000. I couldn't agree more. So for everybody, watching this diversion into talking about Radio Apocalypse, I would thoroughly recommend, as a reader, that you adopt the approach that we've been talking about, which is Ram's recommendation that you read the book and listen to the music, because I think it utterly enhances the experience, mate. And I'm very pleased that you put it together that way. And what I find is anybody I've recommended that approach to and they've adopted it, it's exactly what you're saying. They've really enjoyed it. It's really spoken to them. And I think being able to harness narrative to music.
Issue 2 should be out soon. And it's called Day Tripper, so
brilliant.
It's very obvious what it's based off of. Issue 3 is going to be called Don't Fear the Reaper.
Excellent.
And then issue 4 is called Space Oddity. So
wonderful.
Oh
mate, I'm excited already. I can't. And you can order all of those from the links attached to the conversation. And then before you go, mate, we've got to talk about the great success of the many deaths of Laila Starr, both commercially and but from a critical and fan love standpoint. I'll tell you now, mate. I didn't say this when we were off camera before, but that book is my daughter's favorite book of 21. And she absolutely loves it.
Really glad to hear that.
And it's, you must be so pleased with the response.
I am. As we were talking about this before, I try not to really look at what the reviewers are saying or like how many lists it's up for and all that. Like, that stuff is great, but the thing that I always remember that I find really rewarding is when occasionally people will reach out with like really personal messages about, like, I think someone recently reached out and said that this changed me as a person to read this book. I am a different person having read it now. And that is, to me, like, that is the power of creating art. You can change people, not just change minds, but change people through narrative and art. And that's the endeavor. And if I feel like if one person felt that way, then I've been successful on some level. So and to hear so many people reach out and say that is lovely.
Yeah, it's completely justified. Truly one of the great books of 21, and something I think for you all to be very proud of. And again, you know, if you haven't already ordered and read this book, you really need to, and it's available right here. And Ram, mate, it's always such a pleasure to chat to you, brother.
Yeah, same here. I'll be on anytime.
Brilliant. We'll see you. You will see. Well, you've got more great stuff coming out, so we'll see you soon.
Yes, see you soon.
Take care, mate. If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.